The insanely violet eyes of Elizabeth Taylor. She's box office poison at one point, it says, which is sort of like pulling in Katharine Hepburn. There are all sorts of little pieces of all these great stars of the past. And then what's invented? I mean, how did you sort of figure out what to use from reality? There's this great line that you have that I hope is true, but I mean, it would be even more wonderful if you'd come up with it, that Busby Berkeley says to Judy Garland, that if you're still having bowel movements, then it means you're still eating too much. I mean, I'm quoting that loosely. I mean, did he really say that to her?
No.
Well, I mean, it seems... I mean, as a Judy Garland fan, I've read a lot of biographies, and I know she had a very testy relationship with Busby Berkeley, so I thought, it makes sense. I mean,
But we also...
A higher truth.
What's that?
A higher truth, perhaps.
And also, we live in a world right now where you can go onto Wikipedia and affect the reality of anyone, living or dead. You can sort of contribute to the factual body of information about people. And these contributions don't necessarily have to be real. And so the nature of all reality has become kind of shaky and subjective right now. And so it just, it's fun to play that game instead of sort of saying, it shouldn't be that way. To say, screw it, it's that way, let's play that game, let's have fun with it.
Well, have you been the victim of that on Wikipedia and elsewhere? I mean, like people recreating your truth? I mean, and do you have to go in and re-change it back, or have people do that for you?
My friends are always calling me and saying, I didn't know you were a vampire. Just all this stuff. And so you just eventually just bend over and say, c'est la vie, It's like taking a rape whistle to prison. It's like... It doesn't really help. In fact, it makes things a little worse. Chow time!
It's like the woman in the bar with the Michelob then. I mean, it's like...
I am so drunk. And so in a way, even resisting it calls more attention to the phenomenon. So you just accept the fact that it exists and then exploit it in fiction. Exploit the trend while it's out there.
Well, and what's so perfect about what you're saying, I mean, is the novel, of course, is about this Hollywood star who's as fabricated and created, I mean, as the real life version of this person might have been as fabricated as the fictional version. I mean, so there's no difference really almost in what you're doing in fiction and what the person would do, about themselves on the screen or in public. I mean, you quote Gloria Swanson saying that the thing about the public is if they don't see you weep, then they don't realize that you do weep, or something like that. I mean, that
I made that up too.
Oh, you made that? Oh, that was really good. Well, I'm glad all the best lines are yours rather than these dead stars. But so you get this really moving sense of sort of the difference between the reality. I mean, even Hazy claims to have basically created this star anyway. I mean, as if the star didn't really exist without her imagining her, and yet she's supposedly writing a story about a real person. So the facts and the fiction sort of are very malleable there too.
And so much fun, because I got to put words in Marlene Dietrich's mouth. I got to sort of cast these people. It was like making a little movie where I got to be the writer, the casting director, the cinematographer, everything. And I got to cast the movie out of all these famous, thank God, dead people.
Were you careful to make sure all the names that you mentioned were dead people, like no one sort of slipping in who might still be alive?
Please don't let Buzz Aldrin sue me.
Well, so how much research did you have to do? I mean, did you grow up as a child sort of obsessed by movies and by these great stars of the past and sort of the gossip columns that you quote, like Walter Winchell and things like that? I mean, were you aware of that as a child, or was that something you came to later?
No, I had no awareness of it whatsoever. But part of doing any kind of a story is to look for a kind of a nonfiction form that will act as that paradox, that will lend a a gravity, a reality to an incredibly outlandish story. If you'd seen Fargo without that single card billing at the beginning that said, the following events are based on true stories, and the names of the individuals have been changed to protect their dignity and their blah, 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 honor their suffering. I mean, it's really a somber, and it's got that sad music underneath it. And if we did not have that single card opening, the movie would play like Raising Arizona. It would play like a kind of over-the-top, outlandish, violent comedy. And that single card billing is complete bullshit. But the Coen brothers stuck it on there to lend the movie a kind of gravitas it wouldn't have. And so, like with Citizen Kane, like with Blair Witch Project, you set it within a nonfiction context that lends a reality to it, so it lands as something much more profound than it would otherwise. And so, when I wanted to write this story, I needed a nonfiction context, and that was those gossip columns. So I studied those columns to adopt all the conventions of those columns.
And also you make fun in the book of the idea that, well, the hangers-on to the famous Hollywood stars, I mean, or including, in this case, her 7 husbands, and that she has a young husband who may have a manuscript that he's writing, I mean, in hopes or, sort of holding it back until the day she dies so he can put on the right ending, but it's already written and ready to go so he can make a lot of money from the fact that she'll die.
Because that seems to happen, How long did In Cold Blood sit in galleys as Truman Capote waited for those 2 men to be killed? And how many biographies are sitting there waiting for somebody to fall down and bump their head on the ski slope so they can go right to market and not get sued?
You have a smile on your face without thinking about them. Well, I mean, one of the funny things that you're saying, I mean, is you're building it in fact to make it profound, and yet, as with that story that you read, I mean, it's sort of heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time. I mean, how do you sort of gauge these things so that the right amount of humor is coming through, or is it a calculated effect? Is that just how you are off stage too?
I think it's always got to be a calculated effect. And I thought that was one of the most striking things I recognized writing this, was that when I learned all of those horrific jokes in the 1st and 2nd grade, and I had no understanding what they were about. I remember, so this guy goes to a whorehouse and he says, I want to eat out a whore. And so they give him a whore and he starts eating her out, and he comes across a piece of carrot. So, what the hell? He eats it. He comes across a piece of potato, so he thinks, what the hell? So he eats it. Comes across a piece of celery. He looks up and he goes, are you sick? And she says, no, but the guy before you was. And as a little child, that made no sense to me whatsoever. But I knew that it made my dad laugh. I think maybe my dad taught it to me. And I knew that if I could remember it like a little macro, like a little like a prayer we learned in catechism. Because at the same time we were being taught prayers, and if you could say the Apostles' Creed from beginning to end, it would make the nuns really happy, and they'd give you a prize.
Here we are again. I mean,
and so, so much of our childhood was about being trained to remember these little formulas like algebraic equations, that if you could repeat them perfectly, they would have a positive effect and generate approval from the adults around you. And you didn't have to understand them. Most times you didn't understand them. You just learned them, and you learned to say them because they generated an effect. And as a writer now, it's about putting something together with a very calculated, to generate a very calculated effect.
Well, and I mean, we were talking just before we went on stage about the difference, I mean, between being at an event like this, I mean, where you're